Dean Graham, Reverend Meyer, Reverend Walton, members of the faculty, honored guests, alumni and alumni, members of the class of 2012, families and friends. When the Reverend Peter Gomes of blessed memory, whose pulpit this was for 4 decades, addressed my class graduating from Harvard and Radcliffe colleges, he startled us by ending, "And now, please go away." Reverend Gomes thought this was hysterical. And we did too, I suppose, but it also seemed, well, a bit unfriendly. After all, we had created lives here in this famous place, just as all of you have, a kind of temporary root system. We had worked so hard, just as you have, struggled to learn other languages, many of them dead, and celestial theorems, tried to come to grips with challenging or even destabilizing ideas and terrible histories, just as you have. Cried, laughed till we cried, came out, came in, converted, lost faith entirely. We had striven, won, failed, or as my teenage daughter would say, epic failed. Feared, yearned, and been compelled, as all of you have, to begin to grow up. By the time of that bright morning in June, a few of us had already made the great crossing over Jordan, or into the body of the Ganga, or upon the great waters, back to Guinan, back to the place of the ancestors, to Canaan land where, as the old song goes, the soul never dies. Or perhaps it was into the dark, as T.S. Eliot wrote in East Coker. That remains the mystery. We each had our own private maps of this place and time, just as each of you do. For you, the last 1, 2, or 3 years of your lives, or for the Dr. Anns, the last 8,000. It was only about 8, but you're not wrong. In taxes levied, it was indeed closer to 8,000. These years are written upon your inner landscapes. Landscapes of the Divinity School, of Cambridge, and of Boston, figures and events crisscrossing one another like ghosts, living on only in your own memories. All of you have indeed occupied Harvard. It has been your home. And now you must, as Reverend Gomes said, go away. Or for those of you who, like Dean Graham and me, haven't quite worked up enough centrifugal force to escape Harvard's mighty orbit, you might at least let go of this phase of your life here. We'll just steep here, quietly marinating in the crimson juices. The Southern writer Thomas Wolfe, who came to Harvard from Asheville, North Carolina, in 1920, to study playwriting with George Pierce Baker, ends his first novel, Look Homeward, Angel, with such an inner landscape. The night before leaving North, the novel's hero, Eugene, finds the ghost of his brother Ben, who died at 26, scowling on the porch of their family house. Eugene turned his moon-bright eyes upon the square, and for a moment all the silver space was printed with 1,000 forms of himself and Ben. There, by the corner, in from Academy Street, Eugene watched his own approach. There, by the city hall, he strode with lifted knees. There, by the curb, upon the curb, he stood peopling the night with the great lost legion of himself, the 1,000 forms that came, that passed, that wove and shifted in unending change, and that remained unchanging him. In the history of the human spirit, of our deepest yearnings and motivations, the idea of home is a bottomless well of meaning. The English word home is a very old one whose Indo-European root also grew into the words for sleeping and cemetery. Home is that familiar place where one can safely sleep at night and where one can bury one's dead. One's final resting place is the home of one's bones or ashes, where one might sleep forever, or be carried away in the river to return to formlessness and rebirth. In many cultures to this day, the grave is called the house of the spirit. Home both shelters from the universe as well as recreates its cosmic arcs. It orders and protects and establishes. For millennia, home has been the dwelling place of the family shrine, the place of the lares and penates of the Romans, the domestic ha-ha, specially charged stones and roots of the circumpolar Russian Samoyed, pulled from place to place on special sleds, the reliquary baskets of the Fung, the altar where Agni lives and each day must be fed. The sunlit courtyard with the lemon tree where the family goat is sacrificed on Eid al-Adha and its meat given to the poor. the place of the tended hearth, of the menorah collection, of all those photos our parents weirdly keep and keep accumulating, and that you too will find yourselves keeping and accumulating to your children's bewilderment, they whose bright lives we can only pray are mostly before them. To be homeless in so many cultures, and certainly our own, is to be unsafe and unwelcome. To our brothers and sisters who live outdoors, many of you have ministered in the outdoor church, and for them such vulnerability is daily, even hourly experienced. At its best, home is a sanctuary wherein reside some of our most intense memories of childhood, where the family, as far out as it extended, floated in and out with its endless webs of dynamics that shaped us all so powerfully and against whose forces we're so often helpless, even as adults. Upon returning home, we often regress mightily. As Ram Dass put it so pithily, you think you're so evolved, spend a week at home. Years ago, I read a wonderful account by a reporter who came home to visit for Thanksgiving. It began something along these lines. I open my eyes. I'm uncomfortably cramped into my childhood bed in the room I shared with my brother growing up. I look across the room and see that he's snoring just as cramped as me in his too small bed with his favorite stuffed dog jammed up against his cheek. My brother is 27 years old. He is a cop. At its worst, home can be a prison, a nightmare, a trap of abuse that cripples or kills those who cannot escape because they're defined by home, socially and existentially confined by it. As Stephanie May's recent PhD thesis eloquently reveals, this is true of so many women in the world, their existences defined or even endangered by their role in the homes. This is true of so many gay teenagers driven to despair, fearing they will not be accepted by their own families. This is true of those who are bought and enslaved and kept in other people's homes, or of some children tragically unsafe in their own homes. But if home has been a true sanctuary, we often have very powerful expectations that it will replicate heaven somehow, and like heaven will never change, or like nirvana will set us free from contingencies. As Anna Quinlan Riley observes in her book, Good Dogs Stay, we often fervently think that even though we ourselves will change and be transformed as we live our lives, home, including our parents and pets and furniture, should, like wallpaper, remain completely unchanged throughout the passage of time. Change in these archetypal entities, such as the death of the family dog, the sale of the beloved house where we grew up, are met in the most spiritually mature adults with a kind of disproportionate loss or even outrage. Absence from the landscape or city that was the theater of our deepest experience, for good or ill, can upend us. This is just as true for nomadic peoples, for whom home is a migratory route millennia old, following herds of animals, or for Aboriginal peoples, for whom home is an entire landscape, whose very features are ancestral bodies emerging in forest, claypan, coastal rock, or wadi. To lose the ability to travel these routes or to walk about is to become forever disoriented. Even when settled in cities, Tajik nomads paint the sky hole of a yurt on the ceilings of their apartments. Even sweeping a balcony on the 19th floor in polluted Athens, Greek yayades water the same basil plants that they grew and that their grandmothers grew outside their homes in the mountainous Peloponnese. The loss or destruction of home can thus be devastating, if not apocalyptic. In ancient Mesopotamia, the goddess Inanna weeps for the destruction of her temple, her home in her city Erech, anticipating the great lamentation of the daughters of Yerushalayim in the Hebrew Bible. Inanna says, "The bird has its nesting place, but I, my young are dispersed. The fish lies in calm waters, but I, my resting place exists not. The dog kneels at the threshold, but I have not threshold. The beasts have a place to sleep, but I have not a place to sleep." The forced uprootings in history remain as permanent stains, the Cherokee Trail of Tears, the Middle Passage. Even in our own recent history, the foreclosures in this country, which have wrought psychic devastation upon our nation. Yet the loss of home, or its voluntary renunciation, can also be life-changing, a portal of liberation. One thinks of Hindu householders who renounce all that they possess and love and turn to a different life toward the end of their long lives. And in one day, the great Buddhist nun, Patachara, lost her husband, children, father, mother, brother, and 2 homes, the one she left and the one she created. Naked and shattered, she encountered the Buddha on the road. Bhante, she said, be a support to me. I am friendless, childless, without parents or family or home. Patachara, responded the Tathagata, each of us will die. No place, no relative can be a shelter, protection, or refuge for you. The one who is taken by death will find no shelter among kin. Knowing this, understanding this, the wise one, restrained by virtue, quickly clears the obstacles on the path that leads to freedom. And by his words, Patachara was liberated forever. A final paradox emerges in the religious imagination of home. One pole of the paradox says that for human beings, nowhere is home. The writer of the Epistle to the Hebrews speaks of Abraham's call at the time of Avram to leave his ancestral home in Haran, traditionally believed to be Urfa, now in southwest Turkey, where so many exiles from Syria are streaming, fleeing violence, a beautiful place. In Genesis 12, we read that God said to Avram, "Go you forth from your land, from your kindred, from your father's house, to the land I will let you see." But then in the New Testament, Hebrews speaks of Abraham and Sarah's death. In 11:13, it says, "All of these died in faith, without having received the promises, but from a distance they saw and greeted them. They confessed that they were strangers and foreigners on the earth. For people who speak in this way make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of the land that they left behind, they would have had an opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Indeed, he has prepared a city for them." Strangers and foreigners on the earth. This view, deep woven into the heart of early Christian witness, but just as strongly shown forth in a different way in the Dhammapada, the story of Patachara, says that since we cannot be truly home on this earth, we are nowhere at home. We were created for another world. Peter Gomes's words to us were an easy reminder that we were sojourners here at Harvard, and in one sense, we are all sojourners upon this earth. Home, the earthly place we leave to create our lives and bear our witness, is always burning up in the rearview mirror. Even if we do return, it's not the same, and neither are we. Yet the other pole of the final paradox, ringing out of an old Appalachian hymn, and countering the sadness of Thomas Wolfe and oscillating with it, says that anywhere is home, if Christ my Lord is only there, if we bear witness to our own truths where we travel. Is it a coincidence that for Deans Graham and Dean Smith, the parting gift was the same verse from the Quran, Surah 2, verse 115, "To God belong the east and the west. Whithersoever you turn, there is the face of God." Rainer Maria Rilke wrote very early in his life, "Where is my home?" In this era of globalization, of immigration, and violent exile, the burning question of where home was, is, and will be remains both personal and political. It is a question you will each need to answer, both for yourselves and for others. As you go out from this temporary Harvard home to become ministers, scholars, mothers, fathers, musicians, physicians of the body and of the soul, we who have been privileged over the past years to be your teachers know one thing about you. You will answer this question in ways that are thoughtful, deep, and complicated. You have come here from all over the world, from so many different religious traditions, and you have come here by choice, knowing that you would have to deal not only with us and what we wanted to teach you, but with one another and what you had to teach one another. You came knowing that you would not leave steeped in one uncomplicated truth, one message cut out of whole cloth. You've had to learn to reason together, to truly listen to one another, to confront one another, and to be willing to be changed, just as you have changed us. The very fact that your homes and your truths were not single but pluriform forced you to confront the fact that in both the study and the practice of religion, Paradox is the rule, not the exception, and the paradoxes, like the turtles all the way down, never reach the bottom. And let it be understood that your truths were not relativized by such an educational encounter, but instead deepened and widened immeasurably. Home is a symbol that bears within it such bottomless paradoxes. It is, as Paul Ricoeur declared, a symbol that gives rise to thought. So as the world confronts apparently unsolvable problems like homelessness or domestic abuse, or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over whose home that land and that city are, or the sorrow of refugees in Sudan, I hope that it is you and men and women like you, vast of heart and capacious of mind, listeners as well as leaders, unafraid of complexity or confrontation, and above all, aware of how deeply such symbols as home resonate for human beings. It is my hope that it is you who will be there in the thick of things. Underestimate universal, paradoxical religious symbols like home, and one will get exactly nowhere in resolving anything. That is why you are urgently needed. That is why for you, as you leave your ancestral homes and now your Harvard one, and create new ones, as you respond to the call that brought you here and now sends you out to minister and to interpret, that is why, as you carry your truths with you and see things so clearly and deeply, you will indeed never walk alone. Anywhere will be home.